Hello and welcome to our week 7 instructor highlights video. Boy, we're almost to the end of this first session here. I hope you guys have enjoyed the discussions as much as I have. To kind of look back on week 6 and wrap things up with that, we focused on diversity and community building and advocacy. And as far as diversity goes, the focus of Johnson's book, Privilege, Power, and Difference, was on privilege and how we all are a part of the privilege system if we fit within one of the privileged group categories. First, Johnson, one of the things, there are a couple things actually that from those chapters that I really, when I read it this time, that really stood out for me. The first was the idea of individuals versus systems. And that, especially here in the United States, where individualism is idealized, is really valued and supported and encouraged, that individualistic tendency that we all have as citizens of the United States, how that can cause us to misunderstand the idea of privilege and how it affects everyone within our social systems. Johnson talked about how often, because of our individualism, because if we are people who are not racist, for instance, or who don't have problems with people with various disabilities, or feel like we're enlightened and accepting of people of different sexual orientations, for instance, that when people start talking about privilege in regards to those oppressed groups, that we might get really uncomfortable, that there is a tendency for us to get really uncomfortable with that, because and not want to engage in the conversation because we don't identify ourselves as being a part of that system, because we aren't racist. We are colorblind. We don't have problems going to our gay and lesbian friends' weddings. We have a family member who is disabled, for instance, and we feel that we are fairly enlightened in that regard, and so we're not a part of the problem. But what Johnson proposes is that privilege isn't an individual problem. Privilege exists not because of certain individuals. You might think, oh, well, it's, the Ku Klux Klan, or people who make jokes about people's cognitive abilities, or people who beat up gays on the street. Those are the people that are the problem. They're why privilege systems exist. But that's not the case. We are a part of the problem simply because we are part of one of the privileged categories. So, for instance, if you are male, you would be in the privileged category as far as gender relations go. If you are white in the United States, you are in the privileged position, the privileged category, as compared to everyone else of other racial ethnicities here in the United States. In other countries, other groups would be in the privileged position. For instance, my brother-in-law is from Saudi Arabia, and there are two different sects of Islam that are in Saudi Arabia, the Sunnis and the Shiites. The Sunnis are the Islamic sect that is in the privileged position in Saudi Arabia, whereas my brother-in-law is a Shiite, and Shiites are in the minority, are in the oppressed position in Saudi Arabia. And however, if he would go to Iraq, for instance, the Shiite sect is the one who's in the privileged position in that country. So it isn't just because of the category that you are in, it's whether you are in a privileged category that makes you a part of that category and a participant in the privileged system, whether you agree with it or not. He talks about how we create, as individuals participating in the social system, we create the social system, but the social system in turn influences us and our perceptions. And so it's a very complicated thing. And what I found very interesting is about it was that that in order for us to be a part of the solution, we have to accept that we are a part of the problem, regardless if we personally hold biases against people in oppressed positions. Another idea that Johnson talked about that I thought was really interesting was that in systems that are organized around privilege, that there are three characteristics. There is dominance of the privileged position, and he used gender issue relations as the format for this discussion, because pretty much in all across the world, most cultures, the males are in the privileged position, and females and people of other genders, transgender, or they don't identify with any particular gender, they are in the oppressed position. And so with dominance, for instance, language is a way that you see male words are used as a kind of a general noun in English, for instance. We use the term man to mean all of humanity. What were some other examples that he had? If I think about the second characteristic is identification, and that everything is identified with the privileged group. So in the example with the male-female relations, identification would be expressed as I'm trying to come up with a good example here on the spot. That let's go with business. That when someone is talking about a CEO, that CEO, and you've never seen the CEO before, you will automatically identify that person in your mind as being male gendered. That's an example. Or doctors. That's another example of, you just hear someone's talking about a doctor and they're you have no idea what gender they are. Most people will automatically assume that the doctor is male. And lots of higher leveled positions of power, lawyers, politicians are all of those roles, policemen, firemen, you typically identify with as being male roles, whereas more subordinate positions like nurses, secretaries, hygienist, massage therapists, those typically, when you just think, okay, pick a gender, you're gonna go with female for those because those are more subordinate positions. And the third characteristic of a privilege system is that it is centered around the dominant category of privilege. So, for instance, in the I think it's pretty much everywhere. I have most of my experience trying to find a restroom in the United States. And it always seems like there is a line for the women's restroom and not so much of a line for the men's restroom. And they don't provide enough stalls for women restrooms in public areas, as opposed to men. What is another example of how our society is male-centered? Let's go with sports, because sports is a pastime here in the United States that everybody likes some sort of sport. There's many professional sports teams. Typically, who do you see on television as the sportscaster? Males. I don't know why that, and with the sports themselves. There, for basketball, for instance, there are both professional male basketball teams and professional female basketball teams. However, who gets most of the media coverage? The male teams, not so much the female teams. In fact, women's sports in general get very little exposure in the media. So that's another example of how the society is male-centered. Johnson had a lot in that book. Those were just two things that when I read through it this time that really stood out for me. I'm sure that other things really stood out for some of you. I hope you all had a chance to give it a good read. If you haven't, take some time, because the idea of privilege. I know that we keep centering on white privilege as far as racial relations here in the United States goes, because of some of the nature of some of the discussion topics and the Making Whiteness Visible video. But privilege, it covers a whole vast area of our lives, and it's not just about race. It's about how our society interacts with people from different categories, and how some people have things much easier because of what category they fall in, and other people have things much more difficult because of what category they fall in. Right away as I'm talking here, privilege centeredness of a society with disability. That's a great example. Our society is totally able-bodied centered. It is, we have to enact special laws to enforce that buildings are built certain ways so that people with physical impairments are able to access them. It's not something that we just automatically do. It's not something we automatically think about, offering restrooms that people in a wheelchair could utilize. Or I have there's an intern working with me at Spiritual Care right now, and she is blind, and she shared with me one day how surprising it was for her that a healthcare facility would be so inaccessible to people with blindness. Even though there's like Braille signs all over and things like that, they're making an attempt. But for her, as a person who is blind, she's like, this environment is not easy for me to move through, and it could be, it's not that I can't do it, it could be much more accessible for her if someone would think about making it more accessible for everybody who's visually impaired. So just some really interesting stuff in Johnson. You also finished up deliberation paper 3. That was the last deliberation paper for the session. You wrote about why you think prejudice and discrimination continues to exist in American culture. Maybe you think it's because of the privilege systems that Johnson's talking about. He also identifies capitalism as a perpetuator of privilege. Maybe you identified something different through your research. And then we had a couple of really good discussion boards on the Black Lives Matter movement, and then the video, Making Whiteness Visible. So that was basically our focus for last week. As far as diversity goes, we did also in Loeb talk about or look at the ideas of community building and advocacy. And I kind of wanted to share with you a couple of my own stories, since I keep encouraging everybody to share their stories because it's a great way for us to learn from each other. I have 2 stories of how I got involved in community building and advocacy when I lived out in West Central Minnesota. I'm going to say that when I moved out to West Central Minnesota, I was not very involved in the community. In fact, I should say the broader community. In fact, I belong to an artist commune, and so I was very involved in community life, but it was a much smaller community, and we didn't really mingle with the locals, as we called them, even though we lived right in the middle of town. Basically the commune owned 4 houses on a block in a very small town of 500 people. So we were right in the middle of town, but we didn't really mingle with the locals. So I was kind of isolationist when I first moved out there, very wrapped up in doing my theater work, and having a fun time. But then Steve and I decided that we had enough of that and wanted to kind of settle down more. So we bought a house in another really small town of about 1,200 people, and called Elbow Lake, Minnesota. And we lived there for a while, had a baby, and but still we didn't really get involved too much with the community. We didn't belong to a church. We didn't really talk much with the neighbors. I mean, we talked to, we had people living very close on either side of us, and we were friendly with them. We had a couple of friends who lived in the neighborhood who we'd hang out on a regular basis. But, as far as getting to know like other people in the neighborhood, we weren't very good at that. And politics, village politics, as Lowe puts it, I didn't really care, quite honestly. And so, yeah, we had a child, and I was very wrapped up in being a mom, and we owned then we started a business. That was around the time Sam was 1. And then, because we were local business owners, we had a storefront on Main Street. Then it became necessary for us to get more involved in the community. And so we chose to do that through getting involved in local politics and just like community activities. Minnesota's known for like corn cob feeds and town festivals. Flacca Fest was the name of their town festival. So we got involved in some of those activities. And I think it was around the time my son Sam was 4. We were wanting to provide him with more of a spiritual foundation. So we got involved in our church. And Elbow Lake, town of 1,200, had 7 churches. Church life, church community was very important to the people there. And so that introduced me to a whole nother level of network in the community. And through this, as I started to build the rings of the community that I was a part of, I really felt called to want to do something more, to get involved. And so I joined AmeriCorps. I became an AmeriCorps Vista. And for any of you who have had to take out student loans, it is a great way to pay off some of your student loans. You give a year of service. At the time that I did it, the government will pay off $3,000 of your student loans. You get a weekly stipend. They provided child care. They paid for child care, like all of it. They paid for my health insurance. It was a really good deal. So for a year, I worked at a community action agency, coordinating a program called the Land of Lakes Group Work Camp. And what we did was we helped to rehab homes for about 30 people who were low income, elderly, or disabled. And what this program did was it brought in about 500 volunteers from church youth groups all over the United States through an organization called Group. You may be familiar with their religious curriculum materials. They also have a whole service division that coordinates these mission experiences all over the United States. So I worked with Group to bring in 500 teenagers to for a week to West Central Minnesota. And then as the coordinator, then I also worked with the various communities to raise money for the supplies, to recruit local volunteers, to provide hospitality, and activities for all of these kids when they were in town. And during that week's time, we were able to build wheelchair ramps, paint houses, fix roofs, things like that for 30 houses in a 5-county area. And it was an amazing experience. It's something I'm very proud of. It was an experience where I finally felt like I understood what my purpose was here, at least at that moment in time, what my purpose was, because it took all of these random gifts and talents and interests and experiences that I've had throughout the course of my life that, you know, didn't really seem to have be connected in any way. But as the coordinator for this program, they provided me with a total toolbox, a total skill set that I needed in order to coordinate this huge effort with all these people and resources, and really work at building community in a very special way. It was a transformative event, a life-changing service experience for me. And so I would highly recommend, you can go online. There's lots of different types of AmeriCorps. The one I did was called VISTA, which stands for Volunteers in Service to America. It's like the Peace Corps, except in the United States. AmeriCorps also has conservation corps, a reading corps. You can get sent all over the United States at like a different place every month. You can do something more like what I did, where it's like you're at this one organization in this town, and I chose where I was going to be. So if you just go online and check out what they have available, and then you can apply specifically for what service positions that are available. It's a great experience. You get a letter that guarantees that when you for a year after you finish your time with AmeriCorps, this letter guarantees that if you apply for any government, federal government position, that you will get the job, basically. They say that, like, if it's between you and someone else who are equally qualified, you will be the one who gets the job. So there's lots of perks with it, and it was a great experience. The other experience that I had with community building and advocacy was through the West Side Association. After my son was born, I had time to actually look at things like the water bill and that report that they send with it about what's in the water, and I noticed that it said that our water had lead in it, and so I called the city office because I was concerned about that, and they explained that they said that they were that they were going to try to figure out how to get it, because it was that not only was there lead in the water, but it was above the level that the government allows. And they said that they were working out a solution, and they don't worry about it. Well, then the next time the letter came out, it was still high. And so I went to a city council meeting, and basically, what's happening in Flint, Michigan right now is not an isolated event. That was happening in my small town in Minnesota. Same deal. The water is really corrosive. It's corroding the pipes. The lead's coming from the pipes. We happen to live in a really old part of town that had really old infrastructure, and so the pipes had like more lead in them than the newer pipes are made now. So I started doing advocacy with my neighbors, letting my neighbors know about this, because I know a lot of people don't read that chart or look at it and don't have enough of a science background to understand what this chart is telling them. And I started letting people in the community know that there's lead in our water, like harmful levels of lead, and did that for many, many years, and the city never came up with a solution, and so then I had to switch my advocacy to making sure my neighbors knew that they really ought to get Culligan water dispensers for their homes, for their drinking and cooking. And the level of the lead wasn't ever so high that bathing in it was a concern. But um, it was honestly, I think it was almost 6 years that it went on that there were just high levels of lead. And then finally, one day in the news, they're reading through the city council report, they were talking about how they were going to update the water infrastructure in our neighborhood because of the lead problem. But in the 6 years, the city hadn't come up with a plan and how to pay for it. And so they were going to just assess all of us for the cost of this project. The neighborhood I lived in was a very low-income neighborhood. In fact, when we first moved to Elbow Lake and we're at the bar and meeting people, I remember someone that we were talking to at the bar, when they asked where we lived and we told them, their response was, "Oh, you live in the slum?" Like they couldn't believe we had moved into that part of the neighborhood. Yes, this is a town of 1,200 people. But it was a neighborhood of, elderly people on fixed incomes or really, really young families, people who had only high school educations. There wasn't a lot of employment opportunities out there outside of agriculture, and because of the type of agriculture that was out there, there really wasn't even that many agriculture jobs out there, and it was very seasonal what was available. Our neighborhood, people just didn't have a whole lot of money, and it was also the older part of town, so the property values weren't. It was old housing stock, and what they were suggesting that they were going to assess for paying for this infrastructure project was more than the property values of many of these people's houses, which means that in effect the city was going to be assessing people out of their homes. And so we contacted our state legislator, who happened to own a rental property right next door to my house, and he connected us with a lawyer, and we formed a neighborhood association. I was the vice president. My neighbor across the street was the president. My best friend was the treasurer and secretary, and we started organizing the neighborhood to protest. We were at city council, every meeting they had, city council meetings, public hearings, you name it. We came in force and we spoke our mind and said, yes, this needs to get fixed, but you have to figure out a different way to pay for it. Long story short, now thankfully I read the newspaper and had been reading about the oh gosh, no, I can't think of what it's called. It was an act that Obama had passed, so that people, the goal was to make jobs for communities by providing funding for shovel-ready projects. And so because this project was shovel-ready, I told the city, I'm like, you have to look, keep your eye on whether this legislation goes through, and you could get money from the federal government for it. Sure enough, it did. It paid for 90% of the infrastructure project. We had to work out some other village politics BS about the remainder that they tried to totally assess to us, instead of following the city's already established assessment policies, trying to make it so that the people on the other side of town didn't have to pay anything for the infrastructure project. But we were able to make it affordable for everyone. We no longer had lead in our water. We had new streets, and It ended up being a really, really good experience of how I felt that, even little old me, stay-at-home mom, could affect change and actually do something for my community and my neighborhood and better people's lives. And I've been hearing bits and pieces of other people's stories about how they've been contributing to their communities. And please don't be shy and continue to share your stories, because we can be inspirational to each other. I know several of you have been very inspirational to me, and I hope something I said here in my two stories might spark you be able to relate to, and will spark some action on your part. So we have to look forward to this week. Our learning focus in week 7 is diversity, faith, and ethics. We start our last book in this entire Unified Mission seminar. It's Dr. Richard Kite's An Ethical Life. Dr. Kite is a professor here from Viterbo, and it is an amazing book. I know you'll enjoy it. We're reading the preface and chapter 1, and it's basically it's a basic introduction to the topic of ethics. And then in Loeb, you'll be reading chapter 9, Widening the Circle. And here Loeb talks about the importance of spreading your message and how to spread your message to the community, to people who need to hear your message, talking about how to build your community, kind of how I talked about how I slowly built my community in Elbow Lake, starting with the business community and branching into the church community and getting involved in civic activities and then got onto a project that was a 5-county wide project, and then building bridges is the other idea that he talks about, and the idea that when we're involved in a cause where there are two sides to the issue, for instance, gun control, what would be another one? The right to life. There's a number of causes out there that there are actually organizations on both sides of the issue that are doing work to spread their message and build their networks in their communities. And he talks about, he gives some examples of people who built bridges so that both organizations could benefit in some way, and not have to constantly be butting heads. That instances where movement was made on a cause because of building a bridge. So that's Loeb. And there is no Q&A assignment this week, which is a good thing. The other thing to do reading-wise is to review or catch up on any assigned readings up to this point that you haven't been able to get to in preparation for the final exam, which is coming up pretty soon here. Assignments, there's 2 discussion boards this week. The first one is a online video discussion. The video is entitled Religious Diversity in America. So you'll watch that video. It's posted under the week 7 reading and assignments document on Moodle. And then you're asked to, in your initial post, to summarize the video and tell us what your reaction to the video was. Use that online video form rubric. And if you have any problems viewing that video, let me know so we can get you access to it as soon as possible. The other discussion is an ethical issues discussion, and what you're asked to do for this discussion board is to do some research by reading online, reading some newspapers, Time magazine, whatever, and identify an ethical issue. So then you'll tell us why you identified this particular issue as an ethical issue. How would you apply Franciscan values, diversity awareness, the common good, or ethics toward offering a solution to this issue that you've identified? So those are the two questions that we're looking for. Why do you see it as an ethical issue? And then asking you to provide a solution by applying Franciscan values, diversity awareness, the common good, or ethics. And for this one, use the current event discussion board. So that's it for assignments this week. Just kind of a heads up for the final exam, some prep tips for that. Like I said, catch up on your reading as you need. I will be posting the final exam questions on Sunday, February 28th by 7 a.m. And that will be posted under week 8 on Moodle. And what the final exam is 3 questions that you're asked to provide 2-page essay answers to. So 3 questions. Each question you write a 2-page essay answer to. The final exam is due on Monday, February 29th, so the next day at 11:55 p.m., so almost midnight. And you'll submit those 3 essay answers on Moodle. There's a submission link that will be posted under week 8 there. And the Adult Learner's Guide says that the estimated time for taking this exam is 11 hours. So plan accordingly for those 2 days to schedule out for yourself patches of time, maybe 3 batches of time that equal 11 hours total to be able to do some work on this final exam. And then get it posted by Monday, February 29th at 11:53 or 53, p.m. If you have any questions about how that final exam is going to work before I actually post the final exam questions, please let me know. I'm happy to help you figure things out, since I know that 2 days, it does require some planning. And then just a reminder that the course evaluations are open now. There was a link that was emailed to you, and that link is unique to you, so follow that link and don't ask a friend to send you the link because you deleted it, because that won't work. The course evaluations will be open until February 28th if you're interested in doing that, and we really appreciate your feedback. I appreciate your feedback on the course evaluation. So that's it. And I think I've said enough. We're at about 45 minutes here. So please let me know if you have any questions. Don't hesitate. Don't wait. And we're getting close to spring break here. So thanks, and have a great evening.